Alright, I have finally returned, and I have hopefully fixed the audio glitch I noticed in the first part. Damn, I want to watch this intro again, but we're gonna watch it again anyway when we actually start the game, because we're still in the prologue. We're still reading the recap of the previous game's story through a novel that Nastasha Romanenko wrote. But, anyway. Hi, everybody! I made the little camera smaller because I noticed I was overlapping over Otacon's face in the last video a little bit during codec calls. Which brings me to what I was gonna say about the audio. So, if you guys... During the live stream, I didn't notice this because I wasn't monitoring my stream and I was just watching... I was just playing the game. On my screen, through my TV speakers and everything, I could hear the codec calls just fine. And Ocelot in the helicopter. But then when I watched the stream back, I noticed it was completely muted. There was no audio going through at all. So I googled it, I was like, what the fuck is going on now? So I hate tech issues. Technical issues, I hate them. And so I was just like, what is going on? So I just looked it up, and it was apparently a common problem for a lot of people where they, not even just streaming, just by themselves trying to play the game, that would happen to them. They couldn't hear Ocelot in the helicopter there, and in a few other cutscenes the audio was completely muted for his character's dialogue, but the codec calls were all of them completely muted all the time. Like, whenever the codec was on screen, the two characters are on screen talking, I couldn't hear shit, which is what happened to you guys. I could hear everything just fine when I was streaming, but then, you know, I saw that and I turned on the Streamlabs and I monitored the audio myself, and yeah, I couldn't, I made it so it output to the PC what you guys were hearing, basically. This was offline just a few minutes ago, and I could hear that there was nothing. I was like, dude, why are the codec calls not going through? And so people said like, I saw a few Reddit posts about it from like fucking years ago. Like, I saw a 2013 post about this. Somebody said just switch to like the AV cables, the composite cables and stuff like that. So stop using HDMI, or at least for the audio. And I was like, I can't do that because of the way my capture card is set up with my my HDMI cable and everything else. So I was like, I need to find a different solution. So people said change your audio settings to stereo. Well, that's not even here. There's no audio settings here. So they're like, okay, so if you're on PS3, you have to change your audio settings through your system, which means I had to pull up the cross media bar menu of this and go all the way back to my settings and go down to sound settings, and so that's what I did. I, put outputs to HDMI. Instead of automatic, I had to hit manual, and then I had a huge list of different audio channels, and I was like, I'm not an audio engineer, what the fuck am I supposed to do? So I was like, I guess I'll just trial and error this bullshit, and just tick one on and then off, and keep retrying over and over until the audio for the codec calls finally goes through, maybe. Because somebody mentioned on Reddit that it's a channel thing. It could be a channel thing, like a frequency thing. Well, it turns out they were right. On the first try, I added one new channel, linear PCM, second channel, 44.1 kilohertz and 48 kilohertz, I think, are already enabled by default. And I had to add another one. Just one more. There's a shit ton of them. But I was gonna add them all one by one until it finally worked. What scared the shit out of me is it's saying that if you enable a channel, a frequency basically, that isn't supported by like the cable you're using, your speakers could get damaged. I was like, oh fuck. So I was scared, but I was like, I don't have a choice. I have to try to get this to work. I don't have to switch to AV cables and make this look hella shitty. Make the stream look, garbage quality. Not that it isn't already, but I mean, it would look worse, right? So I got lucky. The first new channel I added, which I forgot which one it was, because there's two channels on by default that are mandatory. You can't turn them off. At least not with an HDMI cable on the PS3. But the one extra channel I added, which I forgot how many kilohertz it was, that was it. I turned it on. I was like, alright, trial and error, here we go. I went into the cutscene again. I started a new game. I could hear Ocelot just fine. It piped through on the stream. And the codec call between Otacon and Snake was totally fine also. I was like, oh, problem solved. Super fast. Oh shit, that was actually an accident. Last time I was dicking around with that, but this time it was an accident. Because, PS3 controller doesn't have, like, anything covering this, so if you slide this on your leg, it'll just be like that, Was it this one? That one, yeah, see? It was just like, that's what happened, basically. It just slid along my leg and So I apologize for that. Anyway, yeah, so I got it fixed. Sorry for the long-winded explanation. Figured I might as well since we're in the prologue where we're not even playing the game really yet, so. But yeah, that's how I fixed it. So anybody out there who's having this issue, whether you're streaming or not, or you yourself just can't hear the audio for codec calls, go to your audio settings. I might as well just show it. Yeah, whatever. It's like, why not? Turn this into a bit of a tutorial video. It's kind of weird. I don't know why for me, I could hear everything just fine, but for you guys, for the capture card, for streaming, you know, for actually like the audio going through to Streamlabs OBS and then to you guys on Twitch and YouTube, I don't know why I had to do this. Here it is. Look, I went manual. So if you go automatic, you just have these two enabled. Linear PCM 2 channel 44.1 kilohertz and 48 are on by default. You can't turn them off. If you go manual, you can turn on all of these. I was going to trial and error every single one of these. I probably would have been here another hour doing that because of how long it takes to load the game back up again and start a cutscene. And start the first cutscene. It's bad. But yeah, I just enabled this one, my first try, basically. I just enabled this one and said, let's see what the fuck happens, and that's it. I just had to turn on this one right here, just that one. And suddenly the codec audio and everything else was piping through just fine to Streamlabs, so now you guys will be able to hear it when we get to that. But yeah, just this. That's it. It's like I said, it still freaked me out though, because look, when you do this, like if you do this, it's fine. This is the default. If you put automatic, this is all you get. If you go manual and you turn on one of these, these don't matter. If you turn on one of these, any of these here, including the one I just turned on so you guys can hear everything right, you get this message. If the device in use does not support the frequency selected, speakers may become damaged. So it scared the shit out of me. But I took the, I took the dive and it worked. Everything's fine. And my speakers, there's no funky audio coming out of it. Doesn't seem like it's going to damage them. I hope not. If not, at least I have this TV under warranty. So it should hopefully be fine. But yeah, just turn on 88.2 kilohertz and then you're good to go, I guess. Very weird audio sort of technical thing with this game. I wouldn't even call it a glitch. It's like they just intentionally decided to pipe the audio through a different channel for codec calls and dialogue and specific cutscenes for some reason. I don't know why they would do that. It doesn't, it's weird. It doesn't make any sense why they would do that, but that's what they did. So yeah, you have to do that. So hopefully that provides a fix for anybody else having this issue that you saw in my previous video. Prologue Part 1 now, it's called. Enough of this palaver. We're on to Prologue Part 2. So we're going to pick up where we left off on Nastasha's book. Page 49, I believe, was where we got, right? And we read all the other prologue stuff before that. That other guy's book, or whatever, his little account in that magazine that was like over 100 pages. About the things he did on Shadow Moses. After reading Nastasha's book or whatever. Something like that. Okay, special. Previous story. The New York Mirror. And we have this going on here. You have to read through it all. By that I mean, yeah, just do that. Hold right, you get to the end. There it is. The shocking conspiracy behind Shadow Moses. This was that one guy. Mr. Anti-Peanut Butter, but he eats peanut butter all the time. Doesn't save your progress. There's no way to save your progress. So every time you want to pick up where you left off, you have to do this again. I never mailed him that disc. Dun dun dun. Alright, so here's Nastasha's book. In the Darkness of Shadow Moses, the Unofficial Truth. So it's her account of what happened that day. Everything that happened in Metal Gear Solid 1. It's her point of view. But, we got some of it because we would call her, we would do the codec calls with her and she would talk to us. But there was, apparently there was more going on because we didn't hear about this Richard Ames guy she talked about. Put that there. But yeah, the recap for last time, a lot of you probably just came from that video, so I don't really have to recap it that well, but it's just this Richard Ames dude showed up who's like Nastasha's ex, showed up to her house and like forcefully recruited her, just like how Snake was recruited basically, into becoming Snake's like another support member of Snake's support team for the Shadow Moses incident. And they set up a whole communications thing in her house in LA in California, and then they were off to the races. I believe after the whole setup, on the page we left off on when I stopped last stream, was literally the beginning of her very first codec call with Snake, which we're about to read a transcript of, essentially, and it's almost word for word, like 100% accurate. You can go back and compare it to our playthrough of Metal Gear Solid 1 to see that, too. Okay, what does she say here? Because it's cut off. The signs of a conspiracy were there, cleverly disguised as it was in a seemingly reckless mission plan. But we failed to see it, and both Solid Snake and I were to regret our folly bitterly. Oh yeah, they realized, of course, at the very end of the game, the big reveal is the whole thing was set up. Kind of. Like, Snake was never meant to stop anything, he was just meant to spread Fox Die and yada yada. The Pentagon just needed him to do that, to be a vector for that virus, and that was it. They didn't actually expect him to succeed in stopping Metal Gear. Alright, so... yeah, here it is. It's time, Nastasha. Richard called out as the call signal came on. The line was already live as I nodded to him and took my position. I could feel myself growing keener, more on edge. This is Nastasha Romanenko. Good to meet you, Solid Snake. You the nuke expert that the Colonel was talking about? The voice that responded over the radio was, above all things, calm. Here was a man operating alone out of a deeply hostile territory, and I could sense nothing resembling tension or impatience in his tone. Instead, it was as level and unruffled as someone answering a routine telephone call at their office desk. Impressed, I continued on. Correct. If you have any questions about nuclear technology, all you need to do is ask. My department is military analysis, so I should be able to provide support with weapons information as well. I was called into this mission as a nuclear emergency search team, NEST. Consultant, and I'd like to emphasize that my cooperation was freely given, although it hardly seemed that way from the intro of this book, but sure. I have no intention of allowing any nuclear strikes on my watch, let alone the rogue kind. Let me work with you on this one. That's true, she did give her consent because she does have a passion for stopping nuclear weapons and all that stuff. But, you know, Richard Ames did break into her house illegally without her consent. That part was, you know, she only agreed after she heard that nuclear weapons were involved, but otherwise she was still kind of coerced a little bit. Anyway, you get to the point fast, don't you? There's a missile that's about to fly. A nuclear strike can never be someone else's problem, and I'm not good at standing around twiddling my thumbs. Not that I can do little more than advise in this case. That fact was all too obvious. Snake was the one who was putting his life on the line in Alaska, and I was safe and sound in California. All I could do was talk over the radio. Snake's voice became less abrupt. It may not seem like much, but it's enough. No one's asking you to come out here and fight. That's my job. Anyway, Nastasha, I'll be counting on your help. It was a strangely comforting voice, a voice that inspired trust. Same here. As I answered, I resolved to myself to do everything in my power to help him complete this mission. The nuclear weapons disposal plant on Shadow Moses dates back to 2002. It was built solely for the purpose of temporarily storing nuclear warheads slated for disposal. I started to brief Snake on the background of the disposal facility, running through the points he needed to know. My first short exchange with Solid Snake ever, I was beginning to understand why he was called the man who makes the impossible possible. The icy calm in the face of insurmountable difficulty, the absolute confidence, made it suddenly seem possible that he would pull off this deadly mission. He had the power to make me believe. I grew conscious of Richard's gaze. What? Oh, just that you have a kind of glow about you when you're working. I like it. A glow? Funny, you used to call it workaholism in the past. You found it very unappealing, I recall. Time flies. People change their minds. It's called nostalgia. You'll dislike it again soon enough. Perhaps. Richard continued to look at me. Solid Snake certainly managed to live up to his reputation. He adroitly wove his way through the enemy's patrols and infiltrated the nuclear weapons disposal plant, where he made contact with Donald Anderson, the DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, director. Throughout the mission, we had radio monitoring capability over Snake's every movement thanks to his internal nanomachines. It was through this access channel that I learned a shocking fact. Donald Anderson, discovered in solitary confinement by Solid Snake, confirmed that the terrorists had full nuclear capability and that Shadow Moses Island was the site of a field exercise for Metal Gear. Metal Gear. The very mention of that name sent me reeling. It was the ultimate weapon, a nuclear-capable bipedal tank that could launch a rapid and accurate nuclear strike from virtually any terrain, from mountains to marshlands to the desert dunes. It could bestow the dubious privilege of initiating a missile strike from sites that were previously out of the question as launch locations. For that very reason, analysts had long predicted that if brought to fruition, Metal Gear technology would rewrite the tactical map of the world. True enough. There are speculations that this unholy grail of weapons development was being pursued late last century in the South African fortress state of Outer Heaven, then in the ultra-nationalist sovereignty of Zanzibar land in Central Asia. One source went so far as to claim that a working prototype had been produced, but the weapon never made it onto the world military stage. Instead, it was destroyed by a special forces operative. The squad in question was Foxhound, and the operative was a man codenamed Solid Snake. I briefly wondered if it were some strange quirk of fate that had brought Snake into this latest incident. But I knew Richard too well. Snake had to have been called in because of his past battles. Whoever had planned this mission had been thorough, and the more I realized the fact, the less I liked it. Of course. A few years ago, I interviewed a high-ranking DoD official and led the conversation to the subject of Metal Gear. His response at the time was that the US had very little interest in developing a weapon like Metal Gear. Not that he officially admitted that such a thing as the Metal Gear existed, on a purely hypothetical level, if such a technology were available. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, nuclear arsenals built to enforce the idea of mutually assured destruction had lost its justification, and the deterrent argument was losing ground. In the current multilateral world order rife with smaller regional powers, as he put it, development priority lay with cruise missiles and smaller weapons with lower lethality that could be carried by stealth bombers. He also went on to note that Metal Gear, with its affinity for rough terrain, would be extremely difficult to discover and destroy. Hence, it was the perfect nuclear strike system for rogue states. He was deeply concerned that, like Outer Heaven and Zanzibar, he was deeply concerned that if such non-democratic sovereignties were to get a hold of the Metal Gear technology, the resulting upset in the balance of military power would lead to a massive rupture in world order. It was a fear that I myself shared. An artifact of the Cold War, the devil's candy created by nuclear proliferation. That was what Metal Gear seemed to be. So why was this weapon, a cutting-edge technology that was politically long obsolete, being developed once again on American soil? It was possible that the Defense Department wanted to restore last century's nuclear strategy, to the national agenda. Or did this new Metal Gear have something that set it far apart from Metal Gear as I knew it? Anderson had more to say. Metal Gear's launch key consisted of two separate passwords, one held by Anderson himself and the other by Kenneth Baker, the president of Armstack. Anderson's own password was already in the terrorists' hands, and he feared that the same was true for Baker's. A renegade Foxhound psychic, codenamed Psycho Mantis, had literally read Anderson's mind and obtained the key. Or so they thought. The bottom line was that the terrorists could activate Metal Gear and launch the missile whenever they pleased. The worst-case scenario had come true. However, Anderson revealed that there was still a way to prevent the nuclear strike. Kenneth Baker alone had the emergency override key that could be used to re-enter the launch code and cancel the missile launch. Even if the terrorists had already completed preparations for a strike, the override would reverse the process. His only hope now, riding on obtaining the override key, Snake attempted to leave the cell area with Anderson in tow. We heard the terrible cries over the radio at the same time Snake did. Anderson had suddenly started to clutch at his own chest in agony, and before we could even recover from our initial shock, he was dead. Dr. Naomi Hunter, monitoring the situation from on board USS Discovery, tentatively diagnosed the cause of death as a heart attack. Snake walked out of the cell alone in search of Kenneth Baker, leaving behind what had until recently been Donald Anderson, chief of DARPA. Yeah. Alright, what exactly is going on here? I confronted Richard as soon as I confirmed Snake's safe departure. You know the situation. There was a Metal Gear field exercise being conducted on Shadow Moses. Foxhound and the Next Generation Commandos were in charge of the exercise, and now they're threatening to use the Metal Gear to launch a nuclear strike. Apparently, I didn't know about that particular situation. If you say so. I glared at Richard, but he didn't turn a hair. He knew as well as I did that I could not abandon the mission. Even if I did refuse to cooperate further, there was an entire group of DoD personnel around me that would not permit that to happen. I briefly closed my eyes and brought the recent events into focus again. What happened to Anderson? Why is he dead? This time I could see a trace of a reaction in Richard's eyes. It's hard to say from our end. Naomi thinks it was a heart attack, but I'll have his medical records pulled just in case. He turned and left the study, presumably to give orders to that effect. The sounds and the voice being broadcast from the radio told me that Snake was moving deeper into the complex in search of Kenneth Baker. Snake found the Armstech president in one of the underground levels. Kenneth Baker was bound to a steel girder along with multiple packets of C4 explosives. Before Snake could free Baker, he came face to face with the originator of this trap, a Foxhound operative called Revolver Ocelot. It seemed that he had anticipated Baker's rescue attempt upon receiving news of Snake's arrival. According to Naomi Hunter, the former director of Foxhound's genetic manipulation program, Revolver Ocelot is a former Spetsnaz. He moved into Oman, Otriad Milici Osobogo, Nazakenya, the Interior Ministry Riot Squad, aka Black Berets, and the SVR, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, a successor to the KGB's first chief directorate, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but was unable to adapt to the new regime and dropped out. Jesus Christ, dude. I probably butchered the hell out of that. The pronunciation. Otriad Milici Osobogo Nazakenya? Like, I'm assuming that's how you say it, but I could be like Nazakenia, maybe. Nazakenia probably sounds better, but I don't know. That's just like, what? Anyway. He cut a swath through the world's hotspots as a mercenary before being recruited by Foxhound. As his codename indicates, Ocelot is a master marksman with a marked preference for revolvers. Right. We could hear the gun battle between Snake and Ocelot over the radio. Ocelot was using an antique single-action army revolver against Snake's SOCOM pistol. The first single-action army revolver was manufactured in 1873. A small number of them are still in production today, but strictly for collectors and antique weapon fanciers. Using this outmoded weapon for live combat is unheard of. But Ocelot seemed to invest the vintage gun with diabolical powers. He would purposefully fire against walls and the floor, leaving a tight web of ricocheting bullets around Snake. This is true. And gradually hemming him in. All we could do was silently monitor the battle. However, Snake was slowly but surely gaining the upper hand by dodging the ricochets and exploiting the revolver's lengthy reload window. Excuse me. This is true, yeah. Finally, just as Snake was about to deliver the decisive blow, an explosion rang out. My hand! Oh my god! Damn it! I should have gotten. Why did I get lazy with this? I told you all I was gonna record that too. The way he yells that out, specifically in the Twin Snakes version, when he gets his hand chopped off and he goes, "What? My hand!" It's so fucking funny. It's just, it's better than this, honestly. What? Like, I want to replace that with Ocelot's what? My hand! Ocelot's scream came a second later, followed by more explosions. What the hell is going on? Richard cried. The controller in charge of the data sent in by Snake's nanomachine started a running commentary. We don't know yet. I'm seeing a life sign other than those of Snake, Ocelot, or Baker. The explosions continue to boom out over the radio. The unidentified fourth subject is knocking down girders. No sign of firearm use. Whatever it is, it's moving fast. The controller's voice rose with excitement. The speed is well above anything a human being should be able to handle. Yeah. The situation was chaotic. I could make out Ocelot's voice through the roar of collapsing metal. Stealth camouflage! Someone left the job only half done. As for you, we'll continue this later. If you notice some of the dialogue is different, it's probably because the Japanese script for the audio for like the actual voice acting in Metal Gear Solid 1, the original game, not the remake, the audio for it is probably different. The script, excuse me, is probably different. And this recap is probably a direct translation when they do that. When they show us like pieces of dialogue, when they show us pieces of dialogue from the original game, the original PS1 game here, like this. These lines are still a little different from the lines we heard when we played the original PS1 game, and that's probably because of what I just said. The Japanese audio, the script that the Japanese voice actors had to read was probably very different, or not very different, but somewhat different. So the direct translation sounds a little, different. It seemed Ocelot had left the area. The explosions went on one after the other as girders crashed to the ground. In the midst of the collapse, they confronted what we could only guess was the fourth life sign. Who are you? I'm like you. I have no name. It was not human, but an artificial machine voice that answered. In spite of the metallic tones, there seemed to be in that voice an unspeakable pain. Baker's labored groans could be heard over the conversation. You have a reinforced skeleton! Suddenly, the possessor of the metal voice let loose an animal howl. A shattering scream set the communication speakers screeching, and I instinctively covered my ears to shut out the maddened sound. The cry went on, then cut out as abruptly as it had begun. In the ringing silence, the controller's voice floated out, thin and hollow. The fourth subject has disappeared. The words brought us out of a state of shock. Can we track him? Negative. He's vanished, no traces. Collect as much data as you can. I have the full results on information relayed by the nanomachines. There's an electromagnetic pattern that resembles a stealth camouflage signature. Stealth camo and reinforced exoskeleton. Richard muttered, deep in thought. Not everything is happening according to plan, I take it? I inquired with some sarcasm. It's with an acceptable deviation. The mission will go on as planned. For a split second, his eyes betrayed his disquiet. Then he quickly recovered his characteristic arrogance. You just concentrate on your job. Snake had called the fourth life sign the ninja. I could not help but wonder about the identity of the name's bearer, and what it was that accounted for the superhuman abilities he had just demonstrated. Far away on Shadow Moses Island, Snake was attempting to raise the shaken Kenneth Baker back on his feet. We could hear Snake asking him about the nuclear launch code, knowing the answer even as he spoke. Baker painfully acknowledged that he had volunteered the information. His arm hung broken and useless by his side, presumably Ocelot's handiwork. According to Naomi Hunter's intelligence, Revolver Ocelot had served as a special interrogations consultant in the Soviet gulags during his days with the Spetsnaz, so he's an expert in torture, yeah. In other words, he was an expert in torture. Jinx! There was no way that the weapons technology executive, an untrained civilian, could withstand the techniques of coercion developed in the cells of Lubyanka. We now had confirmation that the terrorists possessed both launch keys. The situation was more desperate than ever. Baker's response to Snake's queries about the emergency override key was almost as grim. He had entrusted a soldier, a woman who had refused to join the mutiny, with it while they had been sharing the cell. I caught Snake's sudden murmur. The Colonel's niece? Excuse me? The Colonel was presumably Campbell, and Snake seemed to know something I certainly did not. I stole a glance at Richard, but his expression was as closed as ever. He no doubt had known from the outset about the presence of Campbell's niece on Shadow. Snake was pressing Baker, asking him whether there was a way to stop the launch without the override code. The executive gave him a name, Dr. Hal Emmerich. If it were indeed the case that the launch codes were in hostile hands and the strike sequence had been started, it stood to reason that the only person who may know of a way to cancel the launch was the chief of Metal Gear's development program. As Snake promised to search out Emmerich, Baker handed him a single optical disc. It contained, he said, all the data from the training exercise. What exercise data? He had to be referring to the Metal Gear exercise. I saw Richard raise his eyebrows sharply. Baker, oblivious to the frenzy of speculation he had remotely set off, continued. There's no need to feign ignorance. You were sent to retrieve this, and we both know it. I was now even more puzzled than ever. If Metal Gear was being developed on Shadow Moses, surely the research data was backed up somewhere outside of the Arms Tech lab. Not only that, but why would the president of the company have been carrying the data himself? I was apparently not alone in my disconcertment. Snake took the disc, obviously uncertain. It was clear that he, like myself, had not been briefed on the existence of the disc. The disc safely out of his hands, Baker's tones became pleading. You have to stop them. If the truth got out, AT would be finished. I would be finished. But Metal Gear technology is already a known factor. The core technology is, but that's not... Baker trailed off, suddenly pale with pain. Oh God, what did you do to me? We could hear his labored coughing as he gasped out. It can't be. That thing. Damn Pentagon bureaucrats. I get it now. You son of a... He tried to lunge at Snake, but reeled back in a fresh wave of pain. We know the version we heard was, those Pentagon bastards! Still clutching his chest, which is funnier, but, Still clutching his chest, he fell down dead. It was too similar to the last moments of Donald Anderson's life, and the fact had not escaped Snake. He was immediately on the radio with Campbell. Colonel, you'd better be listening real well. This one dropped dead too. Snake demanded an explanation, but neither Campbell nor Dr. Hunter could provide an adequate one. Snake was clearly dissatisfied, but Campbell directed Snake to cooperate with his niece, Meryl. And the only way left to prevent a nuclear strike was to obtain the emergency override key, and the key was in Meryl's hands. Snake walked away from Baker's body in search of the elusive commando. Kenneth Baker had been colluding with Donald Anderson, the DARPA chief, to secretly develop a new Metal Gear on the government's. Excuse me, I flicked the stick there. The government's so called black budget. My later investigations revealed that regular payments in the tens of thousands of dollars had been made to the corporate account of a firm for which Anderson's wife ostensibly acted as a consultant. The arms tech payoff into this dummy company had started several years ago. The total amount is difficult to estimate, but there is little doubt that Anderson had been bribed to the tune of an astronomical sum. Even the government black budget had limits, however. I recalled a rumor from some years before the Anderson payoff started. The CNO, Chief of Naval Operations, at the time had a classified pet project, and the scuttlebutt was that it involved the construction of a completely new type of battleship. What the hell is a scuttlebutt? Just what kind of a ship was never revealed? Just what kind of a ship was never revealed, since the entire program fell apart after the CNO suddenly passed away. The unexpected death coincided with Arms Tech's launch of the Metal Gear development program. The black budget earmarked for the CNO's little project must have been freed up by his death. The question was whether it had been freed up for allocation to the new Metal Gear development. The manner of the CNO's death was officially ruled a suicide, but I could not help recall the theories to the contrary that had made its rounds back then. Whatever the background, Anderson and Baker's deaths could not be a coincidence. Anderson's dying words included a reference to the Pentagon, and I was certain that there was more to it than met the eye. So now Baker is dead as well. Are you looking into his medical records too? I asked Richard. We'll do that, just as a precaution. He did not seem particularly disturbed. It may have been for the best, anyway. Having to babysit a senior citizen with a broken arm sure wasn't going to help Snake with his mission. You haven't changed a bit, I see. What? That bad boy act of yours. You only talk like an insensitive jerk to divert attention from something. I wondered what you're hiding. Ooh, damn, she can read him like an open book. The benefits of having been his ex-wife, huh? Richard turned away. Nothing. There's nothing to hide. Having successfully made the radio contact with Meryl, Colonel Campbell's niece, Solid Snake agreed to put off a rendezvous with her in favor of rescuing Dr. Hal Emmerich, the chief of Metal Gear Development. He reached the lab just as the ninja was attempting to attack Dr. Emmerich, and the two fighters immediately squared off. Snake and the ninja launched into a silent hand-to-hand combat, a ballistic exchange of blows that seemed almost to serve as a private dialogue. The fighting seemed interminable to us as we followed over the radio, but just as in the last encounter, the ninja suddenly let loose an inhuman howl, and vanished in the maelstrom of its ragged echo. It was our second encounter with the ninja, and we were as in the dark about him as ever. But Snake had recognized something during their battle, and he raised Campbell on the radio. It's Gray Fox. The ninja is Gray Fox. I'm 100% sure. That's impossible. You took him, in Zanzibar land. We could hear the perturbation in Campbell's voice. Naomi Hunter suddenly cut in. Yes, he was supposed to have been killed, but he wasn't. Dr. Hunter revealed that her predecessor at the helm of Foxhound's genetic treatment program, one Dr. Clark, had been conducting human testing. Gray Fox, the alpha soldier of Foxhound and the only member allowed the Fox designation, was the subject. After he had been shipped back from Zanzibar land mortally wounded, his superior physical abilities and combat skills had marked him as an ideal test subject for genetic manipulation and skeletal reinforcement experiments. He was listed as killed in action but kept alive in a lab. I could not help but note with some surprise the emotional tone in which the normally collected geneticists described these events. When Snake asked why she had not volunteered the truth of the ninja's identity earlier, Naomi had only a terse reply. It was classified information. Excuse me. According to records she had seen, the subject, Gray Fox, had died in an accidental lab explosion 2 years ago. I turned to Richard. Is this true? What's true? The accident in the lab. It's true. The cause of the explosion was never determined. Dr. Clark died in the accident, and the only remains they could find of Gray Fox were fragments of the reinforced skeleton. So Naomi wasn't the only one who knew about this and didn't say anything. It was classified information, Richard mimicked. To even Nastasha's getting pissed off at him more and more as this goes on, just like Snake was getting pissed at Campbell. Snake secured Dr. Emmerich after the ninja's departure. Amazingly enough, the engineer had believed Metal Gear to be a portable tactical missile defense system, rather than a nuclear-capable tank. It was it was a peculiar irony that the chief developer himself had been unaware that the project was one of offense rather than defense. Yeah, I had to reread that. A portable tactical missile defense system. He designed it with that in mind, and yet it ended up becoming this, even though he was the head engineer. I wonder if they probably just made they were making subtle changes in his designs without telling him, and that's how he never found out. I don't know. On discovering that he had been deceived, Dr. Emmerich volunteered his expertise to Snake. He mentioned his grandfather's involvement in the Manhattan Project and the ethical turmoil the man had carried with him, to the end of his days as a result. Ironically enough, the older scientist's son, Hal Emmerich's father, was born the day the atomic bomb had found Hiroshima. 3 generations. Sometimes I wonder if nuclear warfare is our personal albatross, an inherited pathology. That is very different from the actual words he used. We could hear the pain and the regret in Dr. Emmerich's voice. He seemed genuinely upset that the technology, he had developed, purely for the furthering of knowledge and betterment of mankind, had been exploited for weapons development. You may call me harsh, but I felt little sympathy for him. Technological and scientific innovation need not have direct bearing on nuclear or virological research to contribute to the making of weapons of mass destruction. After all, the ninja was born of genetic engineering and cybernetic research, which could easily have healed a civilian rather than improved upon a soldier. I love what she's touching on right here, because it's right along the lines of that conversation that Otacon had with Snake, right? About wanting to use science and stuff for good, but sadly, science and technology only seem to thrive in times of war because of the fact that the only scientists that seem to become popular and famous are the ones who work on technology for war, weapons technology, and stuff like that. Because, apart from the fact that this country in and of itself is very war-oriented, the US, I mean, the world in general is in a very competitive state thanks to the, overriding, or maybe that's not the right word, but the, I can't find the right word for it, but the all-encompassing economic and social system at large in most places around the world, at least definitely, the global economic and social system, is inherently competitive by nature. So, of course, there's wars breaking out all the time. And so that's a big focus for things, again, especially for a country like this one. So, of course, scientists, the scientists and engineers that become the most popular are the ones who work on weapons. But yeah, just as easily, like she's saying here, all the time and effort that we put into weapons technology, if it was used to actually, design things that could actually help people and meet people's needs, what a beautiful world we could live in instead. If our values were oriented in the other direction, instead of creating things to kill each other, things to help each other, we can make some really amazing pieces of technology and infrastructure that could solve easily 90 to 95% of the problems that plague our everyday society today. So yeah, it is pretty sad right there. Could have easily healed a civilian rather than improved upon a soldier. A scientist cannot plead naivete or naivety. Maybe that's how you say naivety. I don't know. To the practical products of their own research. The consequences must be anticipated, and the ethical burden of a newly developed technology must ultimately rest with the individual researcher. I wondered if Dr. Emmerich would ever realize that onus. Well, from what we just saw in the intro to Metal Gear Solid 2, it seems like he did. Because now him and Snake seem to have joined a group that is designed, or that was made for the sole purpose of trying to stop Metal Gear technology that leaked onto the black market. Or at the very least expose it. So it seems like Otacon is trying to take responsibility for his part in all this. Anyway, free from the laboratory where he was being held, Emmerich cloaked himself with a stealth camouflage of his own making and promised to keep out of sight. With the stealth camo, he could easily evade the terrorist surveillance. His rescued charge safe, Snake departed for a rendezvous with Meryl. Snake's objective was to meet with Meryl and re-enter the launch code using her override key, outwitting the Foxhound psychic Psycho Mantis all the while. To this end, he headed towards the hangar where Metal Gear was being stored. The best laid plans Merrill was ambushed on the way by the Foxhound sharpshooter Sniper Wolf. Snake, attempting to rescue the wounded commando, was himself captured. Wow, we have skipped ahead a lot. They skipped a lot of story at this point. I thought it was going to take us like step by step through everything. This just skipped ahead a huge chunk. We're already at like disc 2. He was taken to the terrorist command post still unconscious, stripped of all his gear. Like, yeah, they just completely glossed over the tank fight with Vulcan Raven, Psycho Mantis, the electrified floor and the gas and everything. Like they totally just went past all that shit. Um Stripped of all his gear, yeah, they right. He was taken to the terrorist command post still unconscious, stripped of all his gear. However, his cochlear implant radio passed unnoticed. Like that's a new word to look up. And we could hear the terrorists conferring about the incapacitated operative. We gathered from their talk that the preparations for the nuclear launch were complete. Richard was unusually intent on identifying the individual terrorists in the room. From the voices involved in the conversation, we confirmed the presence of Sniper Wolf, Revolver Ocelot, and the leader of this uprising himself, Liquid Snake. What little I knew of Liquid Snake was troubling, and it came entirely from a slim file folder Richard showed me, just prior to mission commencement. The man with the same designation as Solid Snake was recruited into Foxhound after Solid Snake's departure from the unit. His fighting skills were formidable, and he quickly rose to leadership position in Foxhound's field operation team. His real name, place of origin, and other information remained classified. Only a single photograph accompanied the documents, and I had not been able to contain my astonishment at the sight of it. It's not a mistake. That is Liquid Snake, said Richard, echoing my thoughts. But how? The face in the photo was the spitting image of Solid Snake. Excuse me? I wouldn't know, but once the two snakes run into each other, something may come out. Excuse me again. His words were non-committal, but Richard's tone spoke volumes. And now the two snakes, Solid and Liquid, had indeed come face to face. But Liquid had little to say. So long, brother, he called out before turning and walking away. The voice was full of hatred, but there was also something in it that seemed to confirm and gleefully anticipate another meeting. Why this was so, was as mysterious to me as the reason he called Solid Snake brother. I would not find out the truth until a little later. What awaited Snake after his brief encounter with Liquid was Ocelot's KGB-tested interrogation techniques. Ocelot apparently had no interest in extracting information, but rather appeared to be enjoying the acts of torture for their own sake. I love how this is touched upon in Grand Theft Auto 5, of all places. I won't spoil too much because I do plan on playing those games too, but there is a character in that game that talks about the real reason that we have torture, and that it's not actually an effective means of extracting information, but rather just more of a sort of recreational hobby that's just made to please the person torturing. It's like a power trip sort of thing. Envisioning the future is just a boot slamming down on a man's face forever, or something like that from that book 1984. It's like just power for the sake of power is what torture turns into. Literally that's it, just exerting power over another person by hurting them, which is the best way to exert power and control over them. That's why I butchered it, but I'm paraphrasing 1984, where it says, if you want a picture of the future that we're trying to create, you can picture a boot stamping or stomping on a man's face forever. Where was I? Okay, yeah. He was enjoying the acts of torture for their own sake. Snake's ragged gasps echoed from the radio in the silence of the control room. The heart rate and other physiological data transmitted by his nanomachines graphically demonstrated the extent of his suffering. All we could do was listen and wait. After Ocelot was done, the battered Snake was taken to a cell. Campbell soon established radio contact with him, but Snake had some hard questions for his former CO instead. He had realized that Metal Gear was a nuclear delivery system, and for once, Campbell was at a loss for an answer. So you did know about this all along, Snake rasped out bitterly. Campbell continued to be silent. It was all the confirmation Snake needed. You should have told me. I'm sorry. Pawns don't need to know, is that it? You've changed. Campbell had no rebuttal to Snake's barbs. According to Campbell, even the president had apparently been unaware of the existence of Project Rex until the day before. To make matters more complicated, he was due to meet with the Russian president the following day for the formal signing of START 3. The treaty stipulated further reduction of the nuclear arsenal, picking up where START 2 left off. The agreement would reduce the number of Russian and American tactical ballistic missiles to somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500. And the signing was a historic event that had been made possible by a long and arduous process. If the fact that a new nuclear weapon was being developed by the United States were made public, there was a significant chance that the signing would never take place. Worse still, the loss of confidence in America's commitment to non-proliferation could create international turmoil. The government clearly had every reason to keep the situation under wraps, and there were ample indications that the terrorists had counted on the fact. The timing of this takeover, as well as the 24-hour deadline, said as much. Campbell continued to plead his case with Snake. Snake, you've got to stop them. Sing it to someone else. You're the only hope we have. Alright then, tell me what this new warhead is about. I told you, I don't know. I don't believe you. Basically, you bastard! If the situation is so desperate, why don't you accept their demands? Give them Big Boss's body, it's just a corpse. That's not an option. Campbell was floundering under the barrage of Snake's questions. Is there a reason you can't comply with that demand? A reason you haven't told me? Naomi broke in as Campbell fell silent. The president's passed a number of policies that severely restrict genetic engineering on humans. He can't afford to have the public know about the military's use of genetically enhanced soldiers. Is that really all there is to it? Campbell did not reply. I received a call from Snake soon after. Captive, alone in enemy territory, unable to trust his own mission controllers to tell him the truth. There was little I could say to help a man in Snake's situation. Capture does not mean defeat. Stay vigilant for a chance to escape and don't give up. That is what she says when we did call her in the jail cell between torture sequences. I had doubts about the effectiveness of these words coming from someone with no combat experience, but it was the best I could offer. We had no choice but to trust in Snake's abilities. As I closed the radio channel, I caught Richard studying me. Yes? You're very passionate about this job. Do you object? It's the job you forced on me, after all. No, but I admit that I'm a little jealous. Ah, the jealousy act. Yes, I know that one too. Richard averted his eyes. I wouldn't call it an act. No, forget it. He lit a cigarette. I don't have a prop to use here. Chesterfield, the same brand as Humphrey Bogart. You still smoke the same brand. You know me, once I decide I like something, I can't kick the habit. Cigarettes, line of work, woman, everything. He didn't look at me as he replied. Nice flirting, dude. It's like his subtle way of telling her he's still interested in her, basically. The torture was conducted again and again, solely for the purpose of breaking Snake. He held out each time, but his strength was steadily ebbing, and the voice we heard over the radio was growing more labored. Naomi, talk to me. I need something to distract me. What do you want me to talk about? Anything. I'm not good at finding things to talk about. And tell me about yourself. About me? That's not so easy. You got any family? It's not a very happy story. I don't have any family. I guess there was one person, someone who called himself my father. Where is he? Dead. I killed him. I was even more taken aback by what Campbell volunteered next. You're talking about Big Boss. What? Big Boss was your... No reason you should have known. Campbell elaborated to Naomi. It was 6 years ago, in Zanzibar land. Snake and I are the only ones who know about it now. Oh God, was Big Boss really your father? Naomi still seemed disbelieving. That's what he said, and that's all I know. You knew and you still killed him? Yeah. Why? Naomi asked fiercely. There was a pause before Snake answered. Because that's what he wanted. And what I wanted. But it's still patricide. Yeah, I know. My personal nightmare, too. Snake's voice was the faintest we had heard. Is that why you left Foxhound? Maybe. I can't deny that it felt good to lose myself. It's easy to do that in Alaska. After a moment of silence, Naomi confided in a low voice. I don't really have a family of my own either. I have a brother who put me through college. That's it. He's not a biological brother and a lot older than me. Where is he now? Naomi's reply was deeply pained. He's gone. There was deep sorrow in her voice, and I thought something more. A stepbrother who put her through school. I wasn't told about that, Richard muttered. There was suspicion in his voice, and, puzzlingly enough, a hint of anger. I opened the personnel file on Naomi. Naomi Hunter, born New York City, 1980X, PhD in genetics. Recruited by the industry giant ATGC soon after completing doctoral program. Moved to California's so-called biotech Bay Area. Led several genetic therapy programs until recruited by Foxhound to fill the post of chief geneticist as a result of her accomplishments in this field. Parents died in car collision when Naomi was 2 years old. One brother, 10 years her senior, a U.S. Marine. Killed in training-related accident when Naomi was 17. Okay. Richard thought for a minute, then scribbled something in his notebook. Summoning one of his men, he tore the page out and handed it to him. Wire this message to the skipper of USS Discovery, and make sure Campbell doesn't know about it. What are you plotting now? I knew even as I asked that Richard would not respond. The torture was repeated time and again, but Snake managed to take advantage of the guard's waning vigilance and escape. The ketchup bottle. The location and the fate of his fellow hostage, Merrill, eluded us. Evading the intense manhunt that followed, Snake still refused to stray from the course that led to the Metal Gear hangar. What drove him? Guilt for Merrill's capture and an urge to avenge her? A sense of duty to the mission. The will to stop the carnage of a nuclear strike. None of them seemed to apply to Snake. He was an enigma. We could do little but watch over him as he ran, wounded and exhausted. After successfully taking on Sniper Wolf as she re-emerged for an ambush, Snake closed in on the Metal Gear hangar only to discover Vulcan Raven blocking his way. The giant Foxhound operative, armed with a fighter-plane Gatling gun, was a daunting enemy. In the end, however, Snake eventually prevailed. The stricken Raven, leaning against the wall, started to speak as Snake approached him. There are some breeds of snakes that nature never intended. I think you and the boss belong to one of those. Go and settle it with him. I'll be watching how it ends. The dying Raven then dropped the bombshell. I'll give you one clue. The man who died in front of you wasn't the DARPA chief. It was Decoy Octopus, one of us Foxhounds. He was a master of disguise. I guess the Grim Reaper was the only one he couldn't fool. Is he dead? Raven did not answer Snake's sharp query. Snake tried another tack. Why go to all that trouble and impersonate Anderson? Raven smiled faintly. That's all the clue you're going to get. Everything else you'll have to figure out yourself. A few minutes later, Vulcan Raven died. Richard was chagrined. So that's how it was. They had us completely fooled. Why would Octopus impersonate Anderson? I asked. I don't know. Maybe to get information out of Snake. That would mean that they knew Snake was coming. Richard stubbed out the cigarette without answering. His face was expressionless, but I knew exactly what he was thinking. We had a leak. While Richard and I were talking, a call was made to Snake. Snake, it's me. Master? Snake answered. It was apparently Master Miller. I need to talk to you about Naomi Hunter. Turn the monitoring off. Miller had barely finished his instruction before Campbell cut in. What about Dr. Hunter? Miller made an exasperated sound. It was clear that he had not intended Campbell to hear what he had to say. Colonel, is Naomi there? Snake asked. No, she's trying to catch up on her sleep. Okay. Campbell turned his attention back to Miller. What were you saying about Dr. Hunter? All right, maybe it's better that the Colonel hears about this now, Miller said resignedly. Go on, urged Snake. That's not the real Naomi Hunter you're working with, Colonel. What? Campbell raised his voice, astounded. Miller continued coolly. Naomi Hunter does exist. Or rather, she did. She went missing in the Middle East some time ago. This imposter must have gotten a hold of her identity somehow. But there's a typo here. Her identify, instead of identity. It's an F. There were a number of ways to obtain someone's social security number and commit an identity theft, certainly. But Dr. Naomi Hunter, an imposter? Who is she really then? Campbell was agitated, but Miller remained cool as ice. Probably a spy. A spy. Excuse me? Yes, sent in to ensure this mission's failure. Are you saying she's one of the terrorists? Campbell's tone was disbelieving, but Snake backed up his former instructor. Excuse me again. I don't want to believe it either, Colonel, but it's true that she's a Foxhound personnel. So it would not be surprising if she took part in this insurrection. Campbell finished dully, as though Snake's words had crystallized his own doubts. Or she could be working for another organization, Miller suggested. Another? No, that's not possible. As Campbell trailed off, Miller spoke up, his tone ruthless. Take her into custody, Colonel. What? It's clear that Naomi Hunter is working against us. Interrogate her and find out what her objective is. If she really is their spy, we're in serious trouble, Campbell murmured. Miller pounced on the gravity of the Colonel's tone. What are you talking about? Nothing in particular, Campbell tried to recover himself. Campbell, did you give her access to some other line of classified information? Campbell remained silent, but Miller pressed on. Does it have anything to do with the way the DARPA chief or the Armstech president died? Look, I don't know what you're talking about. Clearly, Campbell knew something. It was equally obvious that he had no intention of revealing what he was privy to. Perhaps sensing that fact, Miller dropped the pursuit abruptly. In any case, it's too dangerous to retain her in the mission. Hold on a minute. She's an integral part of this mission. In fact, we can't afford to proceed without her. Campbell was being too insistent about Dr. Hunter's value. I had to wonder if it was indeed the case that he had trusted her with highly classified information. Snake was also suspicious. More secrets, Colonel? Give me time. I'll have her background and movements rechecked. That was all Campbell could say. Hurry. Find out what she wants as quickly as possible. Miller was unrelenting. Of course, Campbell agreed reluctantly. Snake, just give me some time. Time is something I wasn't given a lot of, Snake growled bitterly. I like the other line better. I don't have any time left for you. Oh, the back of my throat's starting to kind of dry up and sting a little. I have some water, but we'll see how much it helps. One sec. We're almost at the end, too, because I was only going to do 1 hour streams of this because of how much it taxes my voice. Okay, that was too big of a sip. Oops. Oh, hold on, I won't see anything there. What's the deal? I said to Richard. Is Miller right about Naomi? I don't know, to be honest. It's obvious that there were things in Dr. Hunter's past that I didn't know about. I'm having them go over her background again. Richard was visibly upset. A rare occurrence. I suddenly wondered there had been something between him and Naomi. Richard lit a cigarette and continued in a more composed tone. But if what Miller said about Naomi is true, it raises questions about him in turn. Why do you say that? He's supposed to be in his cabin in Alaska. She's already catching on, so I hear. How did he manage to find out so much about Naomi, by himself and from the middle of nowhere, when the DIA investigators couldn't? Richard called one of his men over and ordered them to look into Miller's activities. You check up on even one of your own? I asked as the agent hurried away. How do you know he's one of our own? Richard shot back, blowing a stream of smoke. Basically. Should I assume you don't trust me either? You're the one who doesn't trust me. Never have, he said quietly, and ground his cigarette into the ashtray. Snake had finally reached the Metal Gear hangar and stood in the shadow of the machine's 50-foot-tall bulk. But considering Metal Gear's state-of-the-art composite armor and Snake's limited arsenal, it was improbable that he could destroy the tank while evading enemy patrols. The most practical avenue of attack was to re-enter the launch code using the override key and thereby cancel the scheduled nuclear strike. As Snake methodically searched for the code entry interface, Emmerich radioed in. He had been making himself useful by breaking into Baker's protected files. From these, he had pieced together the true nature of Metal Gear and its prototype warheads. According to Emmerich, the weapon used a built-in railgun to fire the ballistic missiles clear of the atmosphere. The missile would then automatically realign itself and re-enter the atmosphere on its designated trajectory toward the target. I understood exactly what all this meant, and the knowledge left me cold. Normally, ballistic missiles go through 4 phases from launch to impact. The first is the boost phase, which consists of the time between the missile's launch and the point at which it leaves the atmosphere and exhausts its supply of rocket propellant. Following the burnout, the rocket enters a post-boost phase, which concludes with the separation of the re-entry vehicle that contains the warhead. The third stage is the mid-course phase, in which the re-entry vehicle separates and achieves a controlled descent back into the atmosphere. The warhead's re-entry into the atmosphere and its arrival at the target mark the fourth of the fourth and terminal phase. I mentioned this before, and we saw it in the previous little mini recap with that other crazy guy who wrote the whole article about Nastasha's book that we're reading right now, right? But I saw this entire process they just described, one step at a time, and it was redescribed also in the TV show Fear the Walking Dead. One of the later seasons actually shows a nuclear launch of an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. And it shows it go through all the phases they just described. I was like, holy shit, just watching it, fly up and then come back down and, changing through its phases before it finally fires the missiles actually into the ground and blows up. Current missile defense systems detect incoming ballistic missiles by scanning for the rocket burn that takes place during the missile's boost stage. However, Metal Gear's missile technology employs a railgun rather than conventional rocket propulsion to achieve boost stage acceleration. As a result, there is nothing for existing missile defense systems to detect. The railgun's effectiveness is nothing short of amazing, with a range of over 3,000 miles, rivaling that of mid-range ballistic missiles. It reliably homes in within 170 feet of the target 50% of the time, placing it in the same class as high-end ICBMs. Jesus. The ability of a Metal Gear to conquer virtually all terrain means that the railgun can launch a stealthy nuclear strike from almost any spot on the globe. This invisible attack would make it impossible for anyone to pinpoint the origin of a given missile even in the event of a strike. Without a clear aggressor to retaliate against, the concept of mutual assured destruction falls apart. Without the fear of MAD, the existing rules of nuclear non-engagement would no longer apply, and the world would fall into chaos. Yeah. Because then it's like everybody and their mother would be living in constant fear of a nuclear bomb going off at any moment and not knowing who the hell would fire that first shot if this kind of technology came out. It's a complete game changer for sure. Snake had a few things to say to Campbell after learning the truth. He knew as well as anyone that if the fact that the US had been developing a new breed of nuclear weapons were made public on the eve of START 3, negotiations would break down and US would suffer a devastating embarrassment. Did you know about this, Colonel? I really am sorry, Snake. You really have changed. I won't offer any excuses. Snake, you've got to hear this. Dr. Emmett broke in, ignoring Campbell. The new missiles were complete in simulation only. That's why they had to perform this exercise. To get field data that would back up their simulation results. Okay, yeah. In VR, right? How did the exercise go? Snake asked. Emmerich's reply was discouraging. It seems to have gone better than they expected, but I can't find any of the data. There isn't a trace of the thing on the entire network. You'd think it's backed up somewhere, but zilch. It's one of the optical discs that Baker gave me. It's on the optical disc that Baker gave me. You mean you still have it? Campbell exclaimed hopefully. No, Ocelot took it, Snake replied bitterly. And he left us with a bomb instead. It must have happened when he was a hostage. Does this mean that Ocelot had known of the existence of the exercise data beforehand? This doesn't look good, Campbell murmured deep in thought. I glared at Richard. You knew about this too, didn't you? Knew what? A small matter of this new nuclear weapon technology. Richard shrugged. If I'd told you, would you have cooperated? You probably would have tried to leak it to some media contact, and that would have forced our hand. He left it at that. Would he have had me killed in the interest of national security? Something like that, I supposed. In the world Richard inhabited, preserving secrets always merited higher consideration than human life. That's dark. But yeah, of course. I don't think he'd be in this line of work if that wasn't true. For him, anyway. But I was privy to that secret now. What would happen once the mission ended? I felt a chill go down my spine as I considered the possibilities. Yeah, it's like, we're gonna be silenced after this, aren't we? Richard was quietly puffing on a cigarette. He had too many men with him, working for him every moment. There was no way I could simply walk out of this house. But I had something on my sleeve as well, and I was not about to let myself be exploited without a fight. I looked over at my PC. The screensaver had kicked in, and geometric patterns flitted across the dark monitor. I slipped my PDA into my pocket and headed for the bathroom to send some mail. One of Richard's men trotted over with a slip of paper. Richard studied it, and after some consideration, raised Campbell on the radio. Sorry, I had to reread what she said really quick. ADD. What can I do for you, Major Ames? Campbell's tone was openly hostile, but Richard paid no heed. Colonel Campbell, I'd like you to start interrogating Naomi Hunter. Interrogate her? What are you talking about? Campbell said sharply. There are suspicious points about Dr. Hunter's background, as you've heard. I've therefore sent one of my men over there to talk to her, but she seems reluctant to cooperate. Richard lit another cigarette. But she's taking a nap, the colonel insisted. Actually, she's not. What? In reality, she's been taken into my agent's custody. How dare you? Campbell barked angrily. Richard was unfazed. If, as Master Miller charged, Naomi Hunter has falsified her identity and is in communication with the enemy, there are serious repercussions. I trust you understand. Foxeye, Campbell groaned. Foxeye? This was something new. This mission was like an onion with layer after layer of secret intent. Yeah, you can tell me. She won't talk to my agent. She may talk to you. Find out from Naomi who she is and what her objective is. Absolutely not. I don't take orders from you. And I'm having Dr. Hunter freed immediately. What makes you think you can do such a thing? Replied Richard, exhaling a cloud of smoke. There was a long silence. Who exactly the hell are you? I could hear the barely suppressed rage in Campbell's voice. The DIA wouldn't have the authority to send a man into a Navy submarine and hold someone prisoner. Richard did not answer. Campbell continued. And that's not the only thing. Nothing has been done through the usual channels, including the way you induced Snake and I to cooperate. This mission isn't even official business, is it? So who else can mount such a major operation? Campbell suddenly broke off as though struck by something. Is it possible that... the Patriots? Who? The first we're hearing of this. He murmured. Richard ignored Campbell's outburst. Does it matter what I am? It doesn't change the fact that your life, not to mention your precious Meryl's life, is in my hands. Isn't that right? This time it was Campbell's turn to be silent. I had never suspected that his participation in the mission had been arranged by force. The colonel was literally fighting for his and his niece's life. Thinking it over carefully. Think it over carefully, Colonel. I read it wrong. My eyes are getting a little tired too. Richard's voice was the coldest I had ever heard. There was no reply from Campbell. Snake has no need to know about any of this. We need his full cooperation at this point. Just tell him that Naomi was a terrorist spy and was apprehended while sending them a coded transmission. Do you expect me to betray a friend? Keep him in the dark? Campbell objected furiously. A friend? Are you referring to Snake? Richard smiled coolly. Excuse me? Do you really think he considers you a friend anymore? He had hit a sore spot. Campbell had no answer. Richard moved in for the kill. You've already lied to him too many times. Against my will, under your threats! Campbell was roaring, but Richard barely seemed to register his anger. Certainly, but that's not an issue. You were, after all, giving him false information and relaying false orders to him of your own accord. Then there's Foxeye. I could almost see Campbell grinding his teeth in frustration and rage. Do you still have the right to call yourself his friend? There was nothing Campbell could say. You will cooperate with us. Understood? Understood. The transmission ended. Who are the Patriots? Richard looked away towards another direction at my query. What are you talking about? Don't BS me. He turned towards me. His gaze was icy. Nothing you need to know about. By the way, not that I need to remind you, but don't mention to Snake things that don't concern him. And if I do? Richard's stony silence answered my uncompleted question. I was too far into this business and suddenly seemed to sense danger everywhere. What do you intend to do with me once this mission is over? Nothing. Don't expect me to believe you. Richard allowed himself a brief, oddly sad smile. I suppose I can't. Whew, great place to stop. We're at 1 hour, so I'm stopping here. I went for an hour and 10 minutes because I wanted to make up for the talking about all the technical shit that happened. Oh, by the way, if you notice my webcam was a little smaller, it's because I mentioned this already. Never mind. I noticed I was kind of cropping Otacon's face when we started the game properly last stream before I went into this recap. Hopefully my webcam's not too small. I'll check it after this though. But yeah, my voice is shot once again. My throat's dry. I need to get going and take care of some IRL stuff now too. So we're gonna stop here for now and continue hopefully tomorrow or the next day with this. So we're left off on page 183. I might start on 182 just for the brief recap, I guess. Or maybe even here, where she asks who are the Patriots. But yeah, we'll start from there tomorrow. But for now, that's it for me. So I guess for the outro, we'll just get some 180. I gotta remember, it's 180. Thanks, IQ. 180. Anyway, for now, I'll just go back to the main menu. And this is where I'll sign off. So, as always, folks, thank you all very much for joining me on this little tour through the Metal Gear universe that we've been on for a while now. Only because I stream rarely, because I'm busy and not really in a rush like I was with the Endwalker Marathon for FF14. But, yeah, as always, I appreciate... Hold on, it's gonna go into the intro. I better keep it off the stream. But anyway, as always, I appreciate all of you who came by to watch, all of you watching on YouTube, which is most of you. Thank you all very much for watching and supporting my content here. I appreciate you all for that. And as always, please take care of yourselves, look after each other, stay safe out there. And until next time, please have a good morning, afternoon, evening, and good night. I'm wondering if there was something else in my outro I used to say. That seemed kind of short, but no, I think that's what I usually say. Yeah, I just appreciate the support and everything, so yeah, wherever you are, have a good morning, afternoon, evening, good night, alright? Take it easy, take it easy, everyone. Shit's getting shady. They've introduced a new character here. A new entity we never heard of before. The Patriots. The Patriot Act.
Bruh.
Yes, I'm laughing at the absurdity of how I tried to look ominous at the camera when I said the Patriot Act. I'm sorry. I have to laugh at myself all the time. I can't take myself seriously when I do that shit. Anyway, take it easy, everyone.